Often when we talk about safety in supervision, we're talking about emotional and psychological safety. Today I want to talk about something very different. I want to talk about professional safety, because if you're a supervisor or you're a supervisee, you need to be aware of something that has changed at the Psychology Board over the course of the last few years that is going to impact the way in which you conduct your practice and you conduct your supervision. The change that I'm referring to is an increased appetite from the board to investigate and prosecute cases for falling outside of the acceptable scope of professional psychological practice. For a long time, these issues of what is an appropriate treatment, what is an appropriate assessment methodology, were kind of viewed as internecine wars between psychologists, but the board has indicated a strong interest in prosecuting these cases if they pose a risk to the general public. And I want to highlight three cases in particular. The first one is around 4 years old now and is the case of Jones versus the board. This case was decided and was adjudicated and was appealed and was ultimately adjudicated in the Queensland Civil and Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So it's in the public record. I'm not telling tales out of school. This one exists. In this instance, the psychologist was using what is called the Richards trauma process for treatment of a client. Now, the Richards trauma process is one that you might be aware of, hitting your email spam box fairly regularly. They're quite aggressive in their marketing and they claim quite miraculous cures, typically for trauma as well as a range of other disorders. 1, 2, 3 sessions, miraculous cures, people with complex trauma. The evidence base is not there, and in fact if you read their website, they're quite open about saying, we don't have time to wait around for the evidence to accumulate, we've got to get out there and help people. Now, this psychologist used the Richards process, was reported, was investigated, and was suspended as a result of that use. The second one is slightly different, and this is the case of Duff, and Duff was accused of being both a nutritionist and a psychologist, and providing nutritional therapy treatment and psychology treatment to the same people, and in fact was selling nutritional supplements to his psychology clients. The third one I want to draw attention to is the case of Jones. Jones was adjudicated in late 2023, and Jones was using what are called applied kinesiology or emotional freedom techniques that involve tapping on meridians in order to release emotions. Now, in each of these cases, you can read the expert testimony relied upon by the board, where the board determined that these were not evidence-based and were not acceptable practices for a psychologist to be engaged in. Now, having said that, it's worth noting that in each of these cases, it wasn't just the use of the non-evidence-based practice that was the problem. If you read the adjudications, it's not just the use, it's the failure to use other acceptable treatments. Now, you as a psychologist might choose to use unique and novel treatments in some circumstances when tried and true methodologies have failed. But if you are using those new novel techniques to the exclusion of all else, you need to consider that what you're doing is a considerable risk. Now, for you as a psychologist, you might believe passionately in the use of this particular methodology, and that might be the hill that you are willing to die on. But are you willing to let your supervisee die on that hill? I think as supervisors, we have a really critical kind of sensorial gatekeeping role to make sure that the practices, both in assessment, treatment, intervention, etc., the practices used by our supervisees are going to meet acceptable professional standards and are not going to get them into trouble.